the day I discovered my husband and my best friend were lovers. My name is Caroline Thompson, and for most of my life, I believed love could survive anything. I was the only child of wealthy parents who owned one of the biggest manufacturing companies in Lagos. People saw me as lucky, but my parents raised me with discipline, not pride. They taught me to work hard and treat people kindly. When I met Donald during my second year in university, he had almost nothing. He came from a poor home and struggled to pay school fees. Many people laughed at him because of his old clothes and broken phone, but I saw something different. Donald was smart, calm, and ambitious. I fell in love with him slowly. I helped him through school. I paid his fees, bought his books, and supported him whenever he felt like giving up. My parents did not fully trust him at first, but they accepted him because I loved him deeply. By our final year, everybody called us the lovebirds of campus. Donald always promised he would never hurt me. Back then, I believed every word. I had no idea the same man I trusted with my heart would one day become the greatest pain of my life. After university, my father made me the sales manager in our family company. It was a huge opportunity, and I worked hard to prove myself. Every morning, I arrived before most staff and stayed late into the evening. My father believed leadership was earned, not inherited. Donald had not secured a stable job yet, so I continued supporting him. I never complained because I believed we were building a future together. Sometimes he apologized for depending on me so much, but I always reminded him that love meant standing together during difficult times. My parents eventually grew fond of him. My mother loved how respectful he acted around them, while my father admired his confidence. Donald became more involved in family events, business dinners, and company gatherings. One evening, while we sat on the balcony of my apartment, Donald held my hand and promised me forever. "I may not have money now," he said softly, "but one day I will make you proud." I smiled and rested my head on his shoulder. That night felt peaceful. If someone had told me that the same man would later betray me with the people closest to me, I would have called them wicked for even imagining such a thing. Everything changed one rainy evening. My parents were returning from a business trip outside Lagos when their driver lost control of the vehicle on the expressway. I was in my office when the call came. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then, I reached the hospital. The white sheets covering their bodies destroyed me. I remember screaming until my throat hurt. I remember holding my mother's cold hand and begging her to wake up. But death does not answer tears. For weeks, I could barely eat or sleep. The house became painfully quiet. Everywhere I turned reminded me of my parents. Their perfumes still filled the rooms. Their laughter still echoed in my mind. Donald stayed beside me through the funeral. He comforted me, handled visitors, and protected me from the pressure of business meetings. During that period, he became my only source of emotional strength. After the burial, I felt completely alone in the world. That was when Donald suggested marriage. He said we needed to build our own family and move forward together. I agreed because I was afraid of losing the only person I had left. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the moment my life truly began to fall apart. Donald and I got married quietly 6 months after my parents' burial. It was not the grand wedding my mother once dreamed about, but I did not care about luxury anymore. I only wanted peace. After the wedding, I slowly stepped away from the daily management of the company. My grief still weighed heavily on me, and I struggled to focus. Donald offered to help run operations, while I recovered emotionally. At first, I hesitated, but he kept reassuring me. "You can trust me," he would say. And I did. I officially transferred most executive responsibilities to him, while I handled only a few things from home. Staff members respected him because he carried himself confidently. Within 2 years, people began seeing Donald as the face of the company. We also welcomed our son Jason into the world. For a short period, I truly believed life was healing. Donald showered me with attention whenever people were watching. He bought gifts, organized vacations, and acted like the perfect husband in public. But privately, things slowly changed. He spent more nights at work. He stopped talking to me deeply. Sometimes he returned home after midnight smelling of alcohol and expensive perfume that was not mine. Whenever I asked questions, he blamed work pressure. I wanted to believe him, so I ignored the growing fear inside me. 5 years after our marriage, my entire world broke again. That afternoon, I returned home unexpectedly because Jason had fallen sick at school. I planned to pick up some medicine before taking him to the hospital. As I walked quietly through the hallway, I heard strange sounds coming from the guest room. At first, I thought someone was watching television. Then I heard Donald laughing. A woman laughed with him. My heart began pounding. I moved closer and pushed the door slightly open. Donald was in bed with our caregiver. For a moment, everything around me stopped moving. I could not breathe. The woman noticed nothing because her back faced the door. Donald's face was clear enough for me to see every expression. He looked happy, relaxed, comfortable, not guilty. I wanted to scream. I wanted to destroy the room, but my body refused to move. Instead, I quietly stepped back and left before they noticed me. I sat inside my car for almost 1 hour, shaking. That evening, I returned home pretending nothing had happened. Donald kissed my forehead at dinner. I almost threw up. That night, while he slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling with tears running silently down my face. The man I trusted most had destroyed something inside me forever. For several weeks, I said nothing. Donald behaved normally, as if he had not shattered my heart into pieces. He still called me my love in public and acted like a caring husband around our son. But I could no longer look at him the same way. Every smile felt fake. Every touch felt dirty. I began paying closer attention to his movements. His excuses became more suspicious. Business trips increased suddenly. Late-night meetings became common. One evening, I called the company's head of security, Mr. Bode, a loyal man who had worked with my father for over 20 years. I trusted him completely. I told him I needed hidden cameras installed inside Donald's office. He looked shocked, but asked no questions. 2 days later, the cameras were active. The first week broke me completely. Through the live feeds on my phone, I watched women enter Donald's office one after another. Some were staff members, others were strangers. I watched him kiss them, touch them, sleep with them on the same office couch where he discussed company growth during board meetings. The worst part was his face. He looked free, happy, like our marriage meant absolutely nothing. Yet every night, he returned home pretending to be exhausted from work. And every night, I pretended not to know. People often ask why women stay silent after betrayal. The answer is simple: fear. Donald was no longer just my husband. He had become my entire emotional support system after my parents died. Even though he hurt me deeply, I feared losing him completely. I also worried about Jason. He adored his father. I did not want my son growing up in a broken home, so I carried my pain quietly. Months turned into years. Donald continued his secret lifestyle while I pretended to believe his lies. Sometimes I watched the office camera feeds late at night until my chest physically hurt. I became emotionally numb. One evening, I asked him directly if he still loved me. He looked surprised. "Why would you ask that?" he replied. "Because you feel distant." Donald smiled and pulled me close. "Work stress is killing me, Caroline. Everything I do is for this family." I forced myself to smile back. Meanwhile, I already knew the truth. I knew about the women. I knew about the lies. But I stayed because I could not imagine surviving another loss. Deep down, I kept hoping he would change. I did not realize that Donald's betrayal was only the beginning. A much deeper wound was still waiting for me. My childhood friend Eve entered my life again during one of the darkest periods of my marriage. We had known each other since secondary school. Eve was bold, outspoken, and fearless. Unlike me, she never trusted men easily. When her marriage collapsed after a painful divorce, I invited her to stay with us temporarily. At first, her presence helped me. She made me laugh again. She spent time with Jason and brought energy back into the house. Donald also acted supportive. He comforted Eve and often encouraged her not to give up on life. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was. After 2 months, Eve wanted to rebuild her career. I convinced Donald to employ her in the company as an administrative manager. He agreed surprisingly fast. Soon, Eve and Donald began spending more time together at work. Sometimes they stayed late during meetings. Whenever I asked about it, Eve brushed it off casually. "You know how demanding business can be," she would say. I trusted her. She was my sister in everything except blood. The thought of betrayal never crossed my mind. Not until the night my entire world collapsed again. That night, I checked the office camera feeds out of habit, and what I saw nearly stopped my heart. Donald and Eve were alone inside his office. At first, they were discussing paperwork. Then, Eve laughed softly and touched his shoulder. Donald pulled her closer and kissed her. My phone slipped from my hand. I picked it up again, praying I had imagined everything. But the nightmare continued. They kissed passionately like people who had been lovers for a long time. Then Donald whispered something that made my blood run cold. "She suspects nothing." Eve laughed. Caroline trusts me too much. I felt physically sick. The two people closest to me were betraying me together. My husband, my best friend. That night, I locked myself inside the bathroom and cried silently until morning. But something inside me changed. For years, I had blamed myself for Donald's cheating. I thought maybe grief made me emotionally unavailable. Maybe I was not exciting enough anymore. But Eve's betrayal opened my eyes. Donald was not making mistakes. He was deliberately destroying me. And Eve was helping him. The next morning, I still acted normal. I made breakfast. I smiled at Eve. I kissed Donald goodbye. But inside, the woman they once knew had started disappearing, and someone colder was slowly taking her place. After discovering Donald and Eve together, I stopped crying. Instead, I started observing. I watched every movement carefully. I studied their body language during dinner conversations. I noticed secret smiles and hidden messages. The affair became impossible to ignore once I truly opened my eyes. Donald suddenly cared deeply about Eve's opinions during company meetings. Eve defended him aggressively whenever anyone questioned his decisions. One evening, I pretended to sleep while Donald spoke softly on the phone beside me. "I miss you already," he whispered. Minutes later, Eve's bedroom door closed quietly down the hallway. That was enough confirmation. Still, I remained silent. I needed evidence, not emotions. Over the next few weeks, I saved recordings from the office cameras onto a private hard drive. I documented financial transactions, suspicious meetings, and personal conversations. Then something strange caught my attention. Large amounts of money were disappearing from company accounts. At first, I assumed Donald was investing secretly, but after reviewing records carefully, I realized millions had been transferred into fake companies. Donald was stealing from the business my parents built. The betrayal suddenly became larger than marriage. This was about survival. My parents trusted me to protect their legacy. And the man I loved was slowly destroying everything they worked for. That was the moment revenge stopped feeling wrong. I secretly contacted Mr. Bode again. This time, I asked him to help me access older company financial records without Donald knowing. He agreed immediately. Within days, we discovered shocking evidence. Donald had created fake supplier accounts and approved inflated contracts through shell companies connected to his personal associates. Millions of naira disappeared every quarter. The deeper we investigated, the worse it became. He was not just cheating on me. He was draining the company slowly. I felt anger rising inside me like fire. For years, I had protected him, trusted him, and defended him. Meanwhile, he was using my parents' company like his personal bank account. One afternoon, while reviewing files in my father's old office, I found something unexpected. A sealed envelope addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a private legal document signed by my father before his death. It stated clearly that although Donald managed company operations, the controlling ownership of the business remained permanently under my authority. Donald could never legally take full control without my approval. Suddenly, everything made sense. His desperation, the secret financial fraud, the manipulation. Donald wanted power. And I was the final obstacle standing in his way. That realization terrified me more than the cheating ever did. A few weeks later, I accidentally overheard the conversation that changed everything forever. It was late at night. Jason was asleep, and I sat alone in my room watching the office camera feeds. Donald and Eve were inside his office drinking wine. At first, they talked casually. Then Eve asked the question that froze my blood. How much longer do we keep pretending? Donald sighed heavily. Until I solved the Caroline problem. Problem? That was what he called me. My chest tightened. Then Eve spoke again. She still controls the company legally. If anything happens during the divorce, you could lose everything. Donald remained silent for several seconds. Finally, he said something I will never forget. There won't be a divorce. Eve stared at him. What does that mean? Donald leaned closer and lowered his voice. If Caroline disappears, everything becomes easier. I stopped breathing. Eve looked nervous. You're serious? Donald nodded slowly. She's emotionally unstable already. It won't be difficult to make people believe something happened. My entire body trembled. The man sleeping beside me every night was discussing my death. And my best friend was listening. That was the exact moment fear died inside me. Only survival remained. I barely slept after hearing Donald's plan. Every sound inside the house suddenly felt dangerous. Every smile from Eve looked fake. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what betrayal could do to a person. The next morning, Donald kissed my forehead before leaving for work. I almost laughed. The man plotting my downfall still acted like a loving husband. That same day, I secretly met with my father's longtime lawyer, Mr. Akin. He listened carefully while I explained everything. At first, he looked shocked. Then I showed him the recordings. His expression changed immediately. Caroline, he said quietly, you need protection now. Together, we created a plan. First, we transferred sensitive company shares into secure legal structures Donald could not access. Second, we began collecting stronger evidence against him. Third, we quietly informed trusted board members about possible financial crimes. Most of them had known me since childhood. Unlike Donald, they still respected my family. For the first time in years, I felt something returning. Control. Donald believed I was weak because I stayed silent. But silence does not always mean weakness. Sometimes silence means preparation. And I was finally preparing for war. Over the next 3 months, I played my role perfectly. I smiled during family dinners. I attended events beside Donald. I even comforted Eve whenever she pretended to feel lonely. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I rebuilt my power carefully. Mr. Bode helped me access security reports showing Donald's private meetings with suspicious business partners. Mr. Akin gathered proof of illegal transactions connected to the company. I also hired a private investigator quietly. What he discovered shocked even me. Donald had multiple hidden apartments across Lagos where he entertained women. He also maintained secret bank accounts under fake business names. But the biggest discovery came unexpectedly. One evening, the investigator called urgently. Madam, he said carefully, there's something else. He explained that Donald had recently increased his life insurance coverage on me significantly. My stomach turned. Everything suddenly became clearer. The affair, the fraud, the murder discussion. Donald was preparing for a future without me. But he still underestimated one thing. My father raised me to survive pressure. I stopped seeing myself as a victim. Instead, I started thinking like the daughter of powerful business owners. And powerful people do not destroy enemies emotionally. They destroy them strategically. The company's 25th anniversary gala was approaching. It was one of the biggest business events of the year, with investors, politicians, journalists, and executives attending from across the country. Donald planned to use the event to announce a major company expansion. What he did not know was that I had my own announcement prepared. For weeks, I worked quietly with trusted IT specialists to organize every recording and document carefully. We created backup copies in multiple locations. If anything happened to me, the evidence would still survive. I also arranged private meetings with senior board members. One by one, they agreed to support me once the truth became public. Many admitted they had already suspected Donald's leadership. Meanwhile, Eve became increasingly confident. She moved around the house comfortably, acting almost like the woman of the home. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen unexpectedly and heard her laughing on the phone. "Soon, everything will belong to us," she whispered. She froze when she saw me. I smiled calmly. Inside, rage burned through my veins. The gala date moved closer each day. Donald believed he was preparing for his greatest success, but I was preparing his destruction. And for the first time in years, I stopped fearing the future. I started looking forward to it. 3 days before the gala, something unexpected happened. Jason came into my room crying. "Mommy," he whispered, "Daddy and Auntie Eve were fighting." My heart tightened. "What did they say?" Jason wiped his tears. "They thought I was sleeping. Daddy said things are getting dangerous. Auntie Eve said you are becoming suspicious." I hugged my son tightly. At that moment, I realized how deeply Donald's actions were affecting our child. Jason deserved better. That night, I checked the office camera again. Donald looked stressed. Eve looked impatient. "You promised this would be handled already," Eve snapped. Donald lowered his voice angrily. "Stop pressuring me. What if she finds out everything?" Donald stared coldly at her. "She won't." But for the first time, I noticed fear in his eyes. Maybe he sensed something changing. The next morning, I visited my parents' graves. I stood quietly before the marble stones while tears rolled down my face. "I failed to protect your company," I whispered. Then I shook my head slowly. "No, not anymore. I promised them I would finish what they started." As I walked away from the cemetery, I no longer felt broken. I felt ready. The morning of the gala arrived with heavy rain. Donald looked confident while getting dressed. He adjusted his expensive suit and smiled proudly at himself in the mirror. "You should be excited tonight," he told me. "This company is entering a new level." I stared at him calmly. "You're right," I replied. He had no idea how true those words were. The event hall looked beautiful that evening. Luxury decorations filled the room while photographers captured every important guest arriving. Donald walked through the crowd like a king. Eve followed closely behind him, wearing a sparkling gold dress. Many people admired them openly. Watching them together no longer hurt me. Instead, it strengthened my determination. Mr. Aiken arrived quietly and nodded at me from across the room. Everything was ready. The evidence, the police, the board members, the media. At exactly 8:30, Donald stepped onto the stage confidently. He welcomed everyone and began speaking proudly about the future of the company. People applauded. Investors smiled. Then, Donald announced a presentation video. The lights dimmed. The giant screen behind him came alive, and his perfect world began collapsing. At first, the audience looked confused. Instead of the planned company presentation, hidden camera footage appeared on the giant screen. Donald froze immediately. The first clip showed him kissing his secretary inside the office. Gasps filled the hall. Then another video played, and another. Different women, different locations. The crowd became silent with shock. Eve's face lost all color. Donald rushed toward the technical team angrily. "Turn it off," he shouted. But the system was already locked remotely. The next footage was worse. Financial documents appeared, showing illegal transfers, fake contracts, and hidden accounts. Whispers spread rapidly through the room. Journalists started recording everything. Then came the final video. Donald and Eve discussing how to solve the Caroline problem. The room exploded with panic. Eve stumbled backward. Donald looked terrified for the first time since I met him. Suddenly, police officers entered the hall. Investors moved aside quickly as officers approached the stage. Donald turned desperately toward me. "Caroline, listen." "No," I interrupted calmly. For years, I had imagined this moment. But strangely, I felt no satisfaction. Only peace. The lies were finally exposed, and the man who destroyed my life could no longer hide behind my silence. Donald tried to escape. The moment police officers reached the stage, he pushed one of them and rushed toward a side exit. But security guards blocked every entrance. Mr. Bode stood near the doorway calmly. Donald stared at him in disbelief. "You?" he shouted. Mr. Bode remained expressionless. "I served her father long before I ever worked for you." The officers arrested Donald immediately. Eve began crying loudly. She fell to her knees and begged me for forgiveness. "Caroline, please," she sobbed. I made a mistake. I looked at her quietly. A mistake was forgetting someone's birthday. Betrayal was a choice. "You were my sister," I said softly. Eve lowered her head in shame. Meanwhile, journalists surrounded the scene aggressively. Cameras flashed everywhere as police escorted Donald away. Before leaving, he looked back at me with anger. "You think you've won?" he hissed. I stared directly into his eyes. "No," I replied calmly. "I survived." That single sentence silenced him. After the crowd slowly cleared, I stood alone inside the empty hall. For years, fear controlled my life, but fear no longer owned me. And for the first time since my parents died, I felt truly free. The days after the gala became national news. Television stations discussed the scandal endlessly. Social media exploded with videos from the event. Donald's reputation collapsed overnight. Investors withdrew support immediately, while company auditors uncovered even more financial crimes connected to him. Eve disappeared from public view completely. Some people criticized me for exposing everything publicly. Others called me brave. Honestly, I no longer cared. My focus shifted toward rebuilding my life and protecting Jason. One evening, my son climbed onto my lap quietly. "Is Daddy coming home?" he asked. The question broke my heart. I hugged him tightly. "Daddy made some bad choices," I explained carefully. "But none of this is your fault." Jason nodded silently. Children understand pain more than adults realize. A few days later, I officially returned as acting CEO of the company. Walking into my father's old office again felt emotional. Staff members welcomed me warmly. Many admitted they had waited years for my return. As I sat behind the large wooden desk, I looked around slowly. This company carried my parents' dreams. Donald almost destroyed it, but not anymore. The empire was finally returning to the family that built it. Just when I thought the nightmare was ending, another shocking truth surfaced. During the police investigation, detectives discovered suspicious details connected to my parents' accident years earlier. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. Then Mr. Aiken called me urgently. "Caroline," he said carefully, "the vehicle brakes may have been tampered with." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" He explained that new evidence from old maintenance reports suggested deliberate sabotage. My body went cold. Could my parents have been murdered? The possibility haunted me for days. Then investigators uncovered something even worse. Donald had visited the vehicle maintenance company shortly before the accident happened. According to records, he requested urgent servicing personally. I could barely process the information. The man I loved. The man I married. Could he have been involved in my parents' deaths? When detectives questioned Donald, he denied everything aggressively. But more suspicious financial records connected him to one of the mechanics involved. Suddenly, my entire relationship with Donald felt like a carefully planned trap. Maybe he never truly loved me. Maybe he only loved access. Access to wealth, power, control. That realization hurt more deeply than all the affairs combined. The investigation reopened officially. News outlets became obsessed with the possibility that my parents' accident was actually murder. Meanwhile, Donald remained in custody awaiting multiple criminal charges. One afternoon, his lawyer requested a private meeting between us. At first, I refused, but eventually, curiosity won. I visited Donald inside the detention facility. Seeing him there felt strange. The confident man who once controlled my entire world now looked tired and broken. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Donald leaned forward slowly. "I did love you," he whispered. I stared at him coldly. "Did you love my parents too?" His expression changed instantly. I had nothing to do with their deaths. "Then why were you connected to the mechanic?" Donald looked away. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. My heart stopped. What does that mean? He rubbed his face nervously. I only wanted access to company information before the merger discussions. I paid someone to delay their trip. I never asked anybody to kill them. Tears filled my eyes. His greed started the chain of events that destroyed my family. At that moment, every remaining piece of love inside me finally died. After my meeting with Donald, I spent days struggling emotionally. Part of me wanted revenge. Another part wanted peace. My therapist reminded me constantly that hatred could destroy me if I allowed it to grow too deeply. For years, I survived betrayal by becoming emotionally hard. But healing required something different. It required letting go. One evening, I sat alone in my parents' garden while Jason played nearby. The sunset looked beautiful across the trees. For the first time in years, I felt calm. Not because the pain disappeared, but because I finally accepted the truth. Donald did not define my worth. Eve did not destroy my future. Their betrayal revealed their character, not mine. That realization changed everything. Slowly, I rebuilt relationships with trusted friends and relatives. I focused on therapy, parenting, and restoring the company. The board officially voted me in as permanent CEO 6 months later. Standing before the staff during my acceptance speech felt emotional. My parents built this company with integrity, I told them, and integrity will lead us forward again. The room filled with applause. This time, the support felt genuine, not forced, not manipulated, real. And after years of darkness, real was enough for me. Donald eventually accepted a plea deal to reduce part of his sentence. Eve attempted contacting me several times through emails and letters. I never responded. Some wounds do not need closure. Distance is enough. As months passed, life slowly became lighter. Jason started smiling more again. We traveled together during school holidays and created new memories away from the pain. One afternoon, while organizing old family documents, I found a photograph of my parents holding me as a child. My mother looked joyful. My father looked proud. I cried quietly while staring at the picture. For years after their deaths, I believed I had failed them. But now I understood something important. Survival itself was victory. I protected their legacy. I protected their company. And most importantly, I protected myself. Later that evening, I stood on the balcony overlooking Lagos City, the same balcony where Donald once promised me forever. Back then, I believed love alone could save a relationship. Now I understood better. Love without honesty becomes dangerous. Love without respect becomes poison. And sometimes the people closest to you carry the sharpest knives. But even betrayal cannot destroy a woman who finally learns her own strength. Today, when people hear my story, many ask the same question. How did you survive all that betrayal? The truth is simple. I survived because I had no other choice. Pain changes people. The innocent girl who once believed every promise Donald made no longer exists, but I do not miss her anymore. She was loving, kind, and trusting. And because of those qualities, she suffered deeply. Still, I refused to become bitter. Instead, I became wiser. The company continues growing stronger now under my leadership. Employees feel safer. Investors trust the business again. Most importantly, Jason is growing up surrounded by honesty instead of lies. Sometimes, late at night, memories still return. I remember the day I discovered Donald and Eve together. I remember the tears, the fear, the humiliation. But I also remember something else. The exact moment I stopped being a victim. That moment changed my life forever. Donald thought silence meant weakness. Eve thought loyalty made me foolish. They both underestimated me. And in the end, their greed destroyed them far more completely than my revenge ever could. As for me, I finally found peace. Not because justice erased the pain, but because I learned the most powerful lesson of all. Sometimes, losing the people you love is the only way to discover your true strength.